Snow drifted like torn feathers from a wounded sky, the world made pale beneath a swollen moon. Caleb Thorne stood on his porch, hands tucked into the pockets of his long coat, listening to the winter breathe. The wind carried the smell of cedar smoke and loneliness, both too familiar. Beyond his fence-line, the land stretched empty, a pale ocean of frost where even the coyotes had gone quiet. Nights like these, he thought, could whisper a man's life back to him, and he'd hear only silence in return. Then came a sound so fragile it could have been imagined, a cough, brittle and far. Caleb tilted his head, squinting into the drifting snow. Two shadows moved along the ridge of the trail, staggering, one leaning on the other. He hesitated. He'd seen desperate travelers before, miners, drifters, lost settlers, but something in the shape of these figures stirred his sense of duty. He stepped off the porch and into the wind. When they came into view beneath his lantern's circle, the breath caught in his throat. The older woman, small, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, could barely stand. Her face was carved by hardship, eyes half closed with exhaustion. Beside her walked a younger woman, maybe 27, Chinese, slender yet strong-shouldered from work. Her arm was hooked firmly around the elder's waist, every step an act of will. The old woman's voice trembled like brittle glass. "Please, sir," she whispered, her words tinted by an accent soft and uncertain. "I can barely stand, but take my daughter in. I'll sleep outside." Caleb's heart clenched. Snow swirled between them like the ghost of the frontier's cruelty. He opened his mouth but found no words. Speech felt too crude for the sacredness of that plea. Instead, he lifted his lantern higher, its light spilling over the frozen faces of strangers. The younger woman met his gaze only for a second. Her dark eyes filled with something more painful than fear, shame. She lowered her head immediately, as though used to rejection. He saw it all then, the frost caked on their hems, the bruised knuckles, the exhaustion that went beyond cold. They had been walking for miles, chased perhaps by hunger or worse. He didn't ask. He simply turned toward the cabin, pushed open the door, and said quietly, "Come in." The older woman hesitated, as if dignity were heavier than the snow. "Please, sir, she's a good girl. She can cook, clean. Just a night." Caleb took the old woman gently by the arm. "You'll both come in," he said, his tone carrying a quiet finality that needed no kindness to feel safe. Inside, the warmth of the hearth wrapped around them like an embrace. The women blinked as if stepping into another world. Mei Lin, he'd later learn her name, guided her mother to the small cot near the fire, then sank to her knees, removing the elder's soaked shoes with careful hands. The old woman's cough echoed through the cabin, small but sharp. Caleb fetched a pot, poured in water, and set it over the fire. He worked in silence, the way men do when the weight of decency feels almost too heavy to carry aloud. He found an old quilt folded in a chest and draped it over Madame Lien Zhao's shoulders. When he turned, he saw Mei Lin watching him, not with gratitude, but disbelief, as though kindness was a thing she'd long ago stopped expecting. She rose slowly, bowing her head. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was music carved from restraint. Caleb nodded once, uncomfortable with thanks. "No need," he said. Storms got no mercy for anyone. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like restless ghosts. Inside, the air thickened with the scent of boiling water and pine resin. Caleb poured tea into a tin cup, handed it to Mei Lin, and watched as she knelt beside her mother, holding the cup with both hands so the elder could sip. The gentleness in her movement, steady, reverent, caught him off guard. There was strength there, quiet and unshowy, the kind that didn't ask to be seen. When Madame Lien dozed, Mei Lin moved to the hearth, trying to help. She reached for firewood, her fingers trembling with cold. Caleb stopped her. "You rest," he murmured. "You're frozen through." But she shook her head. "I can work." Her voice was small, but it carried the ache of a life spent earning every scrap of safety. He realized she wasn't trying to please him. She was trying to deserve the right to exist in his home. He said nothing more, only passed her a blanket. She didn't take it at first, perhaps fearing the cost of comfort, then finally accepted, wrapping it around her shoulders. The silence between them was not awkward, it was sacred. Outside, The storm pressed against the cabin walls. Inside, two worlds sat inches apart, thawing. Hours passed. The fire's glow softened. Madame Lien slept soundly for the first time in what might have been years. Mei Lin sat near the door, half asleep but refusing to lie down. Caleb studied her in the firelight. The damp strands of hair against her cheek, the torn fabric of her sleeves, the stubborn dignity that still lingered in her posture. He felt something stir in him, a long-forgotten tenderness. He looked away, ashamed of the warmth he felt for a stranger when pity should have been enough. He poured another cup of tea and set it near her without speaking. She opened her eyes, startled, then whispered, "For my mother?" "For you," he replied. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, she bowed her head, murmured something in her own language, a prayer perhaps. The quiet returned, heavy but not empty. Later, when the wind eased, Caleb stepped outside to check the horses. The cold bit at his face, but he barely felt it. Through the window, he could see Mei Lin tending to the fire, her figure outlined in amber light, her mother sleeping beside her. The cabin, once barren, now looked alive, like something within it had been waiting all along to be filled. He lingered there, unsure why. Maybe it was the way Mei Lin moved with purpose, or how the old woman's chest rose and fell with fragile rhythm. Maybe it was because for the first time in years, his home looked like more than survival. It looked like grace. When he returned inside, Mei Lin had fallen asleep sitting upright, head bowed near her mother's cot. The blanket had slipped from her shoulders. Caleb reached to adjust it, his rough fingers brushing a strand of her hair. She stirred but didn't wake. He froze, caught between decency and the ache of longing for something nameless. He drew back his hand and whispered, "You're safe here," though she couldn't hear him. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm began to die, leaving behind a silence vast enough to start a new story. Caleb sat by the window until dawn touched the hills in faint gold. In that pale light, he knew the truth he wouldn't yet say aloud. He hadn't just opened his door to them. He had opened something far deeper, something that might never close again. The snow melted slow that week, revealing patches of mud and stubborn grass around the Thorn Ranch. Each sunrise found a gentler color on the horizon, but not in town. Towns are funny things. They thaw slower than the land. News had already slipped through the saloon doors and sewing shops like smoke. Caleb Thorne took in a Chinese woman and her mother. By noon, the story had twisted itself into scandal. By dusk, it had become sin. Darla Pritchard, the midwife with a voice sharp enough to slice through Sunday sermons, sat at the general store counter saying, "It's pity today, trouble tomorrow." Men like Thorne lose their sense once a woman bats her lashes. Others nodded, grateful to have a target for their restlessness. Every town needs a subject to talk about when the crops are steady and the weather mild. That week, the subject was Caleb. He didn't much care for the noise. Out on the ranch, the sound of gossip never reached beyond the windmill's creak and the horse's breath. Still, he could feel it, like a change in air pressure, every time he rode into town for supplies. Heads turned a little too slow. Voices lowered too late. Even the preacher's handshake carried hesitation. Mei Lin, unaware of how far the whispers had spread, spent her mornings sweeping the porch and her afternoons tending to her mother. Madame Lien was recovering but weak. Her hands shook when she tried to lift a teacup. "You shouldn't worry for me," she told her daughter in a soft voice. "Only for your heart." Mei Lin smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't. She had carried too many worlds alone to believe she could set one down now. Caleb watched her from the field sometimes, pretending to check the fence line. She moved like a poem, efficient, graceful, never calling attention to herself. He'd grown used to quiet, but hers was different. It wasn't the silence of solitude, it was the silence of someone trying not to be noticed. One morning, Mei Lin asked if she could go to town. "For herbs," she said, "for Mother's cough." Caleb hesitated. He saw the uncertainty behind her composure. "I'll take you," he said. She shook her head. "I can walk. It's not far." When he didn't move, she looked down. "People will talk more if you come." He didn't argue. He simply said, "They'll talk either way." But he saddled her a horse, adjusted the stirrups himself, and told her where the road iced over. His tone was calm, but inside, something knotted. Mei Lin rode into town just after midday, scarf wrapped tight. The first few eyes she met were curious, the next few, unkind. By the time she reached the apothecary, she felt as if the ground itself were judging her. The storekeeper avoided her gaze, placing the herbs on the counter with the caution one uses with strangers carrying sickness. She paid quickly and turned to leave, only to find Darla blocking the door. "Well," Darla said with a smile too wide, "so it's true." Mei Lin froze. Mr. Thorne's got himself some company. The words carried the sweetness of poison. Mei Lin lowered her eyes, said nothing. "You should tell your mother," Darla went on. "This town don't take kindly to secrets." Mei Lin's throat tightened, but before she could reply, boots thudded against the porch. Caleb stood there, hat low, eyes dark as wet earth. The air shifted. Darla's smile faltered. Caleb didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His presence filled the doorway like a storm cloud. "Afternoon, Mrs. Pritchard," he said evenly. She moved aside. Mei Lin stepped past him, face pale but steady. Caleb took the parcel from her hands. "Let's go home," he said quietly. They rode back in silence. The only sound was the rhythm of hooves and wind through dead grass. When they reached the cabin, Mei Lin slid from her saddle and turned toward him. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have gone alone." The words lingered between them, soft but weighted. She wanted to thank him, but gratitude felt too small for what he'd done. So she nodded once and went inside. That night, Mei Lin cooked rice broth over the fire. The smell filled the room, mingling with pine and smoke. Caleb came in from the barn, dusted snow off his shoulders, and sat by the table. Madame Lien watched him with the eyes of a mother who knows when something unnamed has begun to grow. She said nothing, only smiled faintly when Mei Lin placed a bowl before him. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of quiet, one shaped by shared survival rather than distance. When Mei Lin reached for the kettle, her sleeve brushed his hand. Both froze. The contact lasted no longer than a blink, yet the air seemed to pulse with something alive. Caleb looked away first, clearing his throat. "Storm coming," he murmured. "I'll cover the stock." She nodded, unable to speak. After he left, Madame Lien touched her daughter's wrist. "You trust him," she said softly. Mei Lin hesitated. "He has been kind." "Kindness is rare here," her mother whispered. "Don't mistake it for something less." Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the shutters. Caleb lingered under the porch, listening to the muffled hum of their voices inside. He thought of the way Mei Lin had looked at him, half afraid, half grateful, and felt a stir he hadn't allowed in years. The night pressed close, filled with the ache of things unsaid. Over the next days, a fragile rhythm settled. Mei Lin washed clothes by the stream, her breath curling in the cold air. Caleb chopped wood nearby, the sound of his axe syncing with her movements. Sometimes he caught her humming, a tune without words, tender as spring rain. He didn't ask its meaning. Some songs were meant only to be heard. On the fourth evening, while she swept the porch, the wind caught her shawl and nearly tore it away. Caleb stepped forward, catching it mid-air. He draped it gently around her shoulders. Their eyes met, his steady, hers luminous with something uncertain. For a heartbeat, the world went still. She whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once. "You shouldn't stand out here long." "I like the cold," she said. He smiled faintly. "That makes one of us." She laughed, soft, surprised at her own sound. He looked at her then the way a man looks at a sunrise after too long in darkness, and she turned away, blushing beneath the dusk. That small moment carried into every room, every glance afterward. The cabin grew warmer though the weather worsened. Madame Lien's cough eased. Mei Lin began to leave small offerings of gratitude, a mended shirt, a cup of tea waiting when he came in from the barn. Caleb never mentioned them but felt them more than words could say. Still, the outside world didn't rest. Darla's whispers reached the sheriff, who paid a polite visit one gray afternoon, asking if everything was peaceful on the Thorne property. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Peaceful as it can be," he said. When the sheriff left, Mei Lin stood behind the curtain, her heart heavy. The world, it seemed, would not forgive her for being taken in. That night, as the firelight danced across the walls, she found herself staring at Caleb's hands, strong, worn, careful, and wondering what it might feel like to trust a man who asked for nothing. She didn't know that outside, Caleb stood by the window, watching her reflection in the glass, wondering the same. The clock ticked. Snow began to fall again, soft and secret. Somewhere beyond the hills, a storm was gathering, though neither of them yet knew it would change everything. Winter lost its sharpness as February gave way to longer light. The snow still clung to the fences, but the days began to stretch, softening the air around the Thorn Ranch. In that space between thaw and cold, something delicate began to take root, something that neither Caleb nor Mei Lin dared to name. They worked together now, often without speaking. Each morning, he'd find her already outside, sleeves rolled, hair pinned loosely at her neck, hanging linens between two trembling poles. Her breath fogged in the air, white against the gray dawn. He'd split kindling nearby, the rhythm of his axe syncing unconsciously with her movements. Sometimes she'd glance over her shoulder, just long enough for him to catch her watching him through the drifting steam of her breath. Then she'd lower her gaze, cheeks warm, pretending to focus on the basket beside her. Madame Lien's strength came and went. Some mornings she managed to hum softly while peeling potatoes by the fire. Other days, she slept so deeply Mei Lin checked her pulse to be sure. "You work too hard," Caleb said once, after seeing her sit beside her mother until the fire burned low. "I don't know how not to," she replied quietly. The truth in her voice carried more than weariness. It carried history, survival, a life trained to serve others and expect little. He didn't press her, but every day he found small ways to lighten her load. He fixed the back hinge of her door so it wouldn't creak when she checked on her mother at night. He left stacked firewood near the window before dawn so she wouldn't have to fetch it. She noticed each gesture but never mentioned it, only looked at him differently, like someone seeing the first green shoots after a long winter. By March, gossip in town had shifted from scandal to curiosity. "She's still there?" men asked at the saloon. "Living under Thorn's roof?" Darla Pritchard said it loudest, but her voice was starting to sound less certain. Some folks muttered that the rancher had gone soft. Others said maybe he'd found his soul. Caleb ignored them all. He'd stopped riding to town except when absolutely necessary. He preferred the quiet world that had grown within his cabin walls, the sound of boiling rice, the scrape of Mei Lin's broom across the floor, the occasional faint laughter of her mother when she teased her about the silent cowboy who forgets to blink when you pass. Sometimes, when Madame Lien dozed, Mei Lin would sit by the window and stitch torn seams in Caleb's shirts. She sewed carefully, pressing each patch as though it were a prayer. One evening, he caught her doing it and said softly, "You don't need to fix what's already worn." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes the worn things are worth keeping." He had no reply for that, only the feeling that something invisible had passed between them, binding two lives in quiet thread. As spring crept closer, so did danger of another kind. The old woman's cough deepened. Mei Lin hid her worry well, but Caleb saw it in her trembling hands, the way she kept watch through the night. He brought a doctor from town, ignoring Darla's smirk when he rode in at dusk. The doctor was kind but grim. "She needs rest and warmth. She's lucky to have you all caring for her." The words were meant as comfort, but Mei Lin took them as a reminder of time's cruelty. That night, after the doctor left, she sat outside on the porch, staring into the field. Caleb joined her quietly. "She's tired," Mei Lin murmured. "But she pretends not to be." Her voice broke slightly. "I can't lose her, Mr. Thorn. She's all I have." He looked toward the dim glow of the cabin window. "You won't lose her alone," he said. She turned to him, eyes glistening. It was the first time she'd let herself cry in front of him. The tears came silently, like snowmelt on stone. He didn't touch her, didn't dare, but he stayed, sitting beside her until the stars rose, his presence steady as the earth itself. Days later, Madame Lien spoke with a new gentleness. "You look at him like I once looked at your father," she told Mei Lin while braiding her daughter's hair. "Do not be afraid of tenderness, child. It does not weaken you. Mei Lin smiled faintly. I think he is afraid of it too. Her mother laughed softly, then coughed until the sound turned sharp. Then one of you must be brave. Bravery came slowly. It came through simple acts, the way Mei Lin set 2 cups instead of 1 when she poured evening tea, the way Caleb lingered by the table after supper just to hear her humming, the way their silence began to sound like conversation. It came one afternoon when she stumbled while carrying a bucket of water and he caught her arm. The touch was brief, accidental, yet their eyes locked as if the world had narrowed to that single moment. He let go immediately, murmuring an apology, but she shook her head. It's all right, she said. You didn't hurt me. The truth was, he had, just not in the way either expected. Madame Lien's health faltered again in late spring. One evening, she motioned Caleb close, her frail hand resting on his. You are a good man, she whispered. If I don't wake one morning, promise you'll see she eats, that she laughs. Her voice faded. Caleb nodded, though his throat ached too much to speak. She deserves a life without fear, the old woman added. He swallowed hard. She'll have one. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the hills. The season was turning again, and with it came unease. The next morning, Sheriff Abernathy rode by, hat low against the wind. Heard you've been keeping company still, he said, half warning, half concern. Caleb stood firm. They're under my care. The sheriff studied him. Town don't forget quick, Caleb. Be careful. Then he rode off, leaving a cloud of dust that lingered long after. That evening, Mei Lin stood in the doorway watching the storm gather. Lightning flashed, bright and blue across the horizon. It feels like the world's holding its breath, she whispered. Caleb nodded. It's waiting for something to change. She looked at him then, as though wondering whether he meant the sky or them. Before she could ask, thunder cracked loud enough to shake the windows, and Madame Lien called from her room. Mei Lin turned away, running to her side. Caleb remained by the doorway, rain beginning to fall in sheets. He could hear the faint sound of Mei Lin's voice comforting her mother, soft and trembling. He closed his eyes and let the rain soak his coat. The scent of wet earth filled the air, rich and alive. Something was coming. He could feel it, the way animals sense storms before they arrive. Love had taken root in silence, but silence could no longer hold it. And in that fragile stillness between thunder and the next breath, he knew, nothing born from winter stays quiet forever. The storm began as a whisper, a restless hum crawling across the hills, warning of what was coming. Caleb felt it in his bones before he heard it, the air thickening, the sky bruising to a color that didn't belong to daylight. He stood by the barn, hands on the fence rail, and watched the horizon vanish into gray. The cattle were uneasy, shifting and lowing, their hooves restless in the mud. Somewhere behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Mr. Thorne. Mei Lin's voice came through the rising wind. The roof, it's leaking again. He turned. Her shawl whipped around her shoulders like a bird fighting for air. I'll fix it, he said, pulling on his coat. But as he passed her, she touched his arm. Her hand was trembling. Please, she whispered. Don't go out now. He hesitated. Her worry was unguarded, naked in its simplicity. I'll be quick. The wind tore through the trees, scattering needles and ice. He climbed onto the roof, securing the loose boards while rain lashed against his face. Lightning flickered, turning the valley silver for a heartbeat. Through it all he saw her, standing in the doorway, clutching her mother's quilt, her figure small but defiant against the storm. He felt something pull inside him, a promise he hadn't spoken yet but already knew he'd keep. By nightfall, the storm found its full voice. The cabin shuddered with every gust. Madame Lien lay pale beneath her blankets, breath shallow. Mei Lin sat beside her, murmuring words in Chinese too soft for Caleb to understand. When he entered, soaked through, she looked up, and for a moment her composure broke. She's burning, Mei Lin said, pressing a damp cloth to her mother's forehead. The fever won't stop. Caleb knelt beside the bed, feeling the old woman's skin, hot as firewood fresh from the hearth. He stood quickly. I'll ride for the doctor. You can't. Maylene's voice cracked. The bridge is gone. The river's flooded. I'll cross upstream. You'll die. Her words landed like a slap. For a second, they stared at each other, the storm growling outside, the lamp flame trembling between them. Then she whispered, "Please don't leave me." He didn't answer. He grabbed his coat, the lantern, and went out into the storm. Rain hit him like thrown gravel. The ground was slick, the horse spooked, the trail a ribbon of shadow. He urged the animal forward, head down, lungs burning from cold. The river roared nearby, swollen and wild, swallowing trees whole. He found a narrow crossing, barely more than a prayer of safety, and forced the horse into the current. The water surged around them, icy and merciless. For a moment, he thought he'd lose both his mount and his life. But somehow, through sheer will, they reached the other side. Hours later, the doctor's lamp flickered through the rain as they rode back. The storm had eased by the time they reached the cabin, but the damage was done. Fences down, a window shattered, trees torn from the ridge. Inside, Maylin sat by her mother, face wet with tears and rain alike. When Caleb entered, she stood, disbelief and relief warring in her eyes. "You came back," she whispered. "Promised I would." The doctor worked quickly, giving the old woman medicine and rest. "She'll live," he said, "if she's lucky." Then he left, leaving silence and the faint scent of camphor behind. Maylin sank onto the floor, exhausted. Caleb crouched beside her. She looked at him, eyes red, voice trembling. "You could have died." "I've been dead before," he said quietly. "Just didn't know it until now." The words startled even him. She pressed her lips together, fighting a sob, then reached for his hand. It was the first time she'd touched him willingly. "Thank you," she whispered, the syllables heavy with more than gratitude. He squeezed her hand once, then let go. "Rest. I'll watch her." She shook her head. "No. Together." So they sat through the night by the fire, side by side, her head eventually resting against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't breathe too deeply. Outside, the storm drifted east, leaving behind a silence that felt like the world had been remade. By morning, sunlight cut through the window, soft and golden. The hills steamed under its warmth. Madame Lien opened her eyes weakly, smiling when she saw them. "Still here," she murmured. Maylin caught her hand, laughing through tears. Caleb turned away, blinking hard. That day, the three of them moved like people learning how to exist again. Maylin cooked porridge, humming softly. Caleb fixed the broken window, his shirt sleeves rolled high, his movements calm and certain. Madame Lien rested by the fire, watching them with a knowing gaze. "He risked his life," she said to her daughter when he stepped outside. "That's not duty. That's love." Maylin lowered her eyes, cheeks coloring. "He's kind," she said, but her voice wavered. "And kind men break just the same as cruel ones." "You'll know the difference when the world tests him again," her mother whispered. The world didn't wait long. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridge, Sheriff Abernathy, hat pulled low. He dismounted near the fence and called out. Caleb met him halfway, wiping his hands. "Got word from town," the sheriff said. "Darla Pritchard filed a complaint. Claims you're harboring folks without papers. County men will be coming through to look into it." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They won't find trouble here." "Maybe not," the sheriff said, glancing toward the cabin. "But they'll find reason if they want one. You best be ready." When the sheriff rode off, the sun was already sinking. Caleb walked back slowly, his boots sinking in wet earth. Maylin stood in the doorway, reading his face before he spoke. "They're coming," he said. Her expression didn't change, only her breath quickened. "Will they take us?" "Not if I can stop it." "Then they'll take you too." He stepped closer, the distance between them vanishing until he could see his reflection in her eyes. "Let them try." The words came out rougher than he intended, but she didn't flinch. She reached up, her fingers brushing the side of his face, hesitant yet certain. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk everything?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because there was no logic to what bound him to her now, only the quiet truth that love had found him when he wasn't looking. Madame Lien's voice came weakly from inside. "Children," she called. "Come here." They turned, startled by the word she'd chosen. Children. Inside, the old woman sat upright, her eyes bright with fever and wisdom. "I have something to say before the law arrives." Caleb knelt beside her. Mei Lin clutched her mother's hand. The old woman smiled faintly. "I crossed mountains to find my daughter a home," she whispered. "But I didn't know the home would have a heartbeat." Her breath slowed. Mei Lin began to cry softly, pressing her mother's hand to her face. Caleb bowed his head. Outside, thunder murmured again in the distance. Not a storm, but the echo of one. Change was coming, and it would not ask permission. The knock came before dawn, hard and deliberate. Caleb was already awake, sitting by the dying fire. Mei Lin slept in the chair beside her mother's bed, one hand resting lightly over Madame Lien's frail arm. Outside, boots crunched on the frozen ground. He rose quietly, pulling on his coat, heart thudding with the rhythm of the storm still echoing in his blood. When he opened the door, 3 riders waited, county men with dust-gray coats and law badges that gleamed like judgment. Their horses snorted clouds into the morning chill. Behind them, Sheriff Abernathy sat stiff in his saddle, eyes apologetic. "Caleb," he said, "they've come to question your guests." Inside, Mei Lin stirred at the sound. "Who is it?" she called softly. Caleb didn't answer. He stepped out into the yard. "No need for questions," he told the men. "They've done nothing wrong." One of them, a red-bearded deputy, dismounted and scanned the property. "You're housing foreigners without registry. The law's clear. They'll have to come with us." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Over my dead body." The deputy smirked. "That can be arranged." For a moment, the air thickened like the sky before lightning. Then the sheriff spoke, voice low and urgent. "Don't make this worse, Caleb. Let me handle it." But Caleb had spent too many years silent. Too many winters watching the world crush the gentle and reward the cruel. He walked back to the porch, every step measured. Mei Lin stood now, her face pale, her mother struggling to rise behind her. "Stay inside," he said softly. "Whatever happens, stay with her." She shook her head, voice trembling. "No, please. I can't lose you too." He turned, his gaze steady. "You won't." The men spread out near the barn, hands close to their holsters. Snow began to fall again, slow and soundless. Caleb stood at the porch edge, the wind lifting his coat like a banner. "You want to take them," he said, his voice calm as stone. "Then tell me, what's her crime? That she's different? That she worked and prayed and cared for her dying mother in peace?" The deputy spat in the snow. "Don't play preacher, Thorne. Step aside." "Can't." The standoff stretched thin. The sheriff swung off his horse, eyes flicking between them. "Enough," he barked. "Nobody dies over pride." "This isn't pride," Caleb said. "It's worth. And I'll not see it measured wrong again." Mei Lin stepped onto the porch, clutching her mother's hand. "Please," she said to the sheriff. "We'll go if we must. Just don't let them hurt him." The old woman's voice followed, weak but clear. "No," Madame Lien whispered. "No more running. Let the truth stand here." Her words cut through the wind like prayer. The sheriff's face changed. Something in it softened. He turned to the deputies. "You see an old woman and her daughter. I see no crime here." The red-bearded deputy scowled. "You're risking your badge for a rancher's folly?" Abernathy stepped forward. "Maybe it's time this town learned what law looks like when it remembers mercy." The men hesitated, uncertain. Caleb didn't move, his body a wall of quiet defiance. Finally, the deputy cursed, swung onto his horse, and rode off, the others following. Snow swallowed their tracks. Silence fell, heavy and unreal. The sheriff met Caleb's eyes. "You'll have trouble again, you know." Caleb nodded. "Then I'll be ready." Abernathy sighed, then turned his horse toward town. "Marry her, Caleb," he said over his shoulder. "Make it harder for them to take her." Caleb froze. The sheriff was already gone. Behind him, Maylin whispered, "What did he say?" He faced her. The wind carried between them the faint scent of cedar smoke and tea, the remnants of every night they'd survived together. He took a step closer. "He said I should marry you," Caleb murmured. Maylin's breath caught. "And what do you say?" He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing her wrist. "I say, I already did, in every way that mattered." Her eyes filled, the snow melting on her lashes. "You don't even know what love costs." "I know," he said, voice rough, "and I'm still paying." Behind them, Madame Lien smiled faintly from the doorway, tears tracking down her weathered face. "He's right," she whispered. "Worth is what remains when everything else is gone." The next morning, the cabin became a chapel. Sheriff Abernathy returned, carrying a Bible and the dignity of silence. Only the wind bore witness. Maylin wore her mother's ribbon around her hair. Caleb wore the same coat he'd ridden through the storm in. When the vows were spoken, they didn't kiss. They simply held each other's gaze as if the whole world depended on that single look. Afterward, Madame Lien pressed her hands over theirs. "Now," she said softly, "I can rest." That night, she passed away in her sleep, the faintest smile lingering on her lips. Maylin buried her mother beneath the birch tree behind the cabin. Caleb stood beside her, hat over his heart. "She was brave," Maylin whispered. "So were you," he said. She looked up at him, eyes shining with something stronger than grief. "Then let's be brave together." When spring came, the valley bloomed in wildflowers. The cabin, once a place of shelter, became a home of belonging. Townsfolk still whispered, but quieter now. Some even nodded when they passed. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the hills, Maylin stood on the porch watching Caleb mend a gate. She thought of the night her mother had begged for shelter, of how a door had opened and changed everything. She touched the railing, wood warm beneath her hand. "You saved us," she said. Caleb looked up, smiling. "You gave me something worth saving." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and lilac. Maylin closed her eyes, feeling her mother's spirit in the quiet air. And from the edge of the world where dusk met memory, an old truth settled like a blessing. That the worth of a woman is not what the world decides, but what a good man sees and refuses to forget.